What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the first episode of 2022 for Be the Number. I am your host, Spencer Aguiar, and we're beginning the year in style with two of my favorite contributors in this space, Owen Vrabel and Matt Miller. The duo hosts the highly acclaimed betting podcast Draws and Fades, a show that is witty, sharp, and a must listen if you want to continue adding to your bankroll this year. You can find their podcast on Twitter at draws_n_fades, and both can be found at their personal handles at Matty Mills 85 and at Owen_Vrabel. Boys, thanks for kicking the season off with me here at the Tournament of Champions.
Let's go, Spencer. Thanks for having us on, man. I'm excited.
Thank you for having us on, Spencer. We appreciate it. We wouldn't want to start off our season any other way.
You know, we have talked about this in the past, but I do want to discuss how your show came to be for my listeners here at Golf WRX that may not have heard that conversation before. It's going to be a lot of reiterating thoughts on my end because I consider Draws and Fades to not only be one of the staples of the space, but as I told you guys a few months ago on my Better Golf podcast, you two are true pioneers of the golf betting podcast industry. I've been producing content since 2017 myself, but the audio world of verbalizing thoughts wasn't something that was on my radar for a long time. And it really only got pushed to the forefront of my mind for two reasons. One was when Nick, otherwise known as Stick Picks on Twitter, asked me to co-host Better Golf with him over at Win Daily. And the second was when you two invited me on Draws and Fades at the beginning of 2021. I honestly didn't know what to expect recording a podcast. You can essentially say the two of you took my virginity in that world, but our projected 5-minute segment turned into 25 minutes, and the rest has been history for me from there. So I just wanted to thank you guys again for providing me a different sort of a platform to be heard, but talk a little about your podcast in general. What can listeners expect when they tune in, and how'd the show start originally?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you for all the kind words. Appreciate it. And we were blessed to have you as one of our, first guests. And we didn't know what we were getting into either at first, to be honest. And me and Matt both went to University of Connecticut together, loved betting on golf, and kind of were just always bouncing ideas off each other, who we liked in a given week. The Pat Mayo show for sure was an influence. Him and Feinberg, I think everything they do kind of gives a little extra flavor to the golf betting industry. And we were recognizing that I think that there were people that were going between the cracks. Like maybe they didn't enjoy them, or they wanted extra stuff. Like they wanted more golf content. And we were like, hey, we talk about it every week. Why don't we just start doing our own podcast? We had no idea what we were getting into. And we started doing it over Zoom, into Skype, and we turned it into how I think we like to talk about golf. Like we look into the value of certain golfers, look into the lines. At the end of the day, we're trying to have fun, trying to have a entertaining type show, but also look at the numbers and see that there are trends. There's course history patterns. There's recent form patterns, and trying to use all the knowledge at our fingertips to make a betting show fun for the people, but also knowledgeable, and trying to make some money in the process. So it's been an awesome ride. Me and Matt go back a long way. It's been great. And obviously very welcome to be back on one of your podcasts. And Matt, I guess we've been doing this for a couple of years now. I feel like we're almost veterans at this point.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Like you said, we didn't really know what to expect when we first jumped into it. But we just decided to kind of have fun with it and keep it going. I think the thing we try to do is like keep it light as possible. Everyone who's betting on Golf Weekly, we all look into, pretty similar numbers and pull from the same database and stuff like that. So I think what we try to do is just have fun with it. And as much as we obviously use those numbers and, our models and everything to make our picks, we try to also joke around, keep it light, make it entertaining for people to listen to.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the start of the program, you guys do a really good job of adding in a combination of personality and successful picks. And I want to discuss the pick making aspect a little bit further. I think it's crucial for us in this subsection of ours, whether that be from a betting or DFS perspective, to be transparent in all avenues of the process. That obviously adds in some pros and cons in both of the aforementioned markets, but I'm a believer in trying to articulate strategies and thought processes to the masses. My goal is to be able to use my platform to not only teach, but also provide additional concepts that others can implement. My capping process is extremely unique in the sense that I am running my own numbers. I think that's one of the things that does separate me from a lot of people is, yes, like we're all using the same core set of numbers, but I'm kind of changing the data to equal something that I want with it. But I'd love to have both of you discuss what a week of handicapping looks like for you. Are there any particular sites that you use, general strategy for building a betting card or DFS lineup, or really just anything that you incorporate into your process weekly? Matt, I'll have you start us off.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. There's certainly people that I rely on each week for information. You're one of them. I like to read, PGA touts episodes, previews each week to kind of learn about the course, where he's at. So there's certain individuals that I definitely, rely on their information weekly for me to start my research. Then, researching Fantasy National, kind of previous winners and how they won, different trends, different types of players that play well at each course. That's kind of where I start almost before I even look at the odds list, because I like to kind of have an idea of who I'm leaning toward before I see the numbers. And then if I see a guy that I like and I think it's a pretty good number on the board, I'll jump on it right away. But I like to definitely take a look at everything and get an idea of what type of player I'm looking for, who I like before the numbers come out on Monday. And then once they come out, if there's something that, at least from my perspective, I like, I'll take it right away. If I think that it's a fair number or I wish it was a little bit better, then I start waiting for, each site to release their odds and see if I can catch anything better later on in the day. And that's kind of how I start my week typically.
What about you, Owen? Does your strategy differ from what Matt just said?
I think it's definitely relatively similar, and me and Matt have a lot of similar outlooks on golfers for the most part, but we do differ in some of our favorites. But I also think that there's a certain strategy with guys that are consistently popping up in your model, so to speak, in Fantasy National, whatever database you're using, that may still be getting value because they haven't won too many times before. And this has come to fruition for us in the past year or so with Abe Ancer, Sam Burns, even Max Homa. And being consistent with that, even if you kind of see a little bit of a downplay in their game, knowing that, so trying to identify guys that you think have the win equity to pull off something. And obviously there's top 20, top 10 plays we play each week as well. And that kind of goes for me more into the recent form and course history type models. But I think you kind of can end up getting upset with yourself if you get away from a guy who you had picked out as a guy who you think is going to have success on the PGA Tour and maybe goes through a month or so of not playing well and then pops off and bangs out, 4 or 5 top 20s in a row and then gets his first W, a la Sam Burns. That kind of style, I feel like you're looking for guys that are going to have value now that maybe won't in the future, like Sam Burns now. He's played himself into a range where the value is tough to see. But on a week-to-week basis, I definitely start out similar to Matt with, I love PJ Tout's articles. Shout out PJ Tout. Also, your boy, Andy Lack. Andy Lack puts out a great preview on Sundays. Just trying to get course information, just refresh your memory on each course, and then kind of put into perspective where guys are at in their current form and see if that lines up with their course history here. And I mean, for me, it's a lot of feel too. I'd like to see the value on the board and try to make your picks that way. But I think it's a combination of all three. I don't think there's a perfect magic formula. But I will say, looking at your model for this week, I may have some similar thoughts. So I love looking at your stuff as well.
Well, I appreciate that. And yes, I mean, to reiterate your thoughts on it, PGA Tout, Andy Lack, both of those guys do an incredible job with what they do with it. There's a lot of good people in the space. You guys with the podcast, you do. There's a lot of people putting out really good information with it. And I mean, I think you brought up a really good point. That's one of the reasons why I run my information to be longer term in general. I'm trying to, the Sam Burnses of the world where the value ends up getting sucked out of the number. When that situation happens, you just have to deal with it and move on from the situation with it. But by doing that, you do find guys that go overlooked in the market over and over and over again. And, Sung J M, when he won during the offseason in Vegas, that's one of those situations where my long-term numbers really liked him. And unfortunately, I ended up going against what my number said. He was number one in my model. But, sometimes it's, I can put out all the right information and still have the right answer and not end up taking my correct answer with it. But
you can put all the right information to still mess it up somehow. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of what it comes down to. And there is luck that goes behind it. Like, it's so different than every other sport. When you look at football, you can kind of predict game script. You can kind of predict pace of play in the NBA. For golf, the margins are super thin when it comes down to it at the end of the day. And sometimes there will be one little minute detail that will put you on or off of somebody. And I don't remember what my exact reasoning was for why I didn't bet Sung Jae in Vegas that week. But, there was some reason behind it at the time with it. And unfortunately, you end up building a card in a certain fashion where you run out of room very quickly with what you do it. Like, I'm not trying to overexpose my cards every single week. And when you punch a ticket on, Russell Henley when he's 30 something to 1, and you punch a ticket on whoever else who's Aaron Wise, let's say, at 30 something to 1. And
don't get me started on Russell Henley.
Well, maybe that should be the first problem, is don't bet Russell Henley. But when you do things like that, all of a sudden, you run out of room on a ticket before you know what happens with it. And that's an unfortunate thing, but it's going to be what happens in the market. Like, you're just trying to run numbers. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to run numbers that long-term are going to beat the casino's numbers of what they're releasing. And, there's more guys that show value than the people that I'm betting. Like, there's 10 to 12 guys a week usually that have some sort of value for me in the outright market, and whittling that down to 4, 5, 6 plays is still not the easiest thing to do. Like, no matter how good your picks are, you're going to have weeks where you just pick the wrong 4 people, even though, you really like a guy like Sung J M and he just doesn't end up being the pick with it. But, I think the feedback I've gotten from having these conversations weekly has been overwhelmingly positive. I think what it shows is that there is a vast need for actual strategy to be discussed, and not just reading off picks with no tangible route being presented for how to improve moving forward. The other road might be fine in the short term if a winner is hit, but it doesn't allow personal growth if you don't figure out a game plan that works for you. The thing I want to stress is that no two users go about their week in quite the same fashion. Somebody like Matt and Owen might have a lot of similarities just because they're doing a show together. They're good friends. They're talking a lot of golf together. But, there's different statistical sites, podcasts, articles to take in every single week. And it shows there's a million different ways to crack an egg while still getting profitable results. But as I always say, find what works best for you and try to improve and grow on it weekly. But before we get into the actual handicapping and course breakdown of the event in front of us, I want to play a quick game with you guys. You two will be the guinea pigs, as it will be the first time I have done it on the show. But I'm going to ask 3 questions ranging from golf, pop culture, other sports, etc. And I just want you to give me the first answer that pops into your head. There's no right or wrong answer to these questions, and neither Matt or Owen know what I'm about to ask. I may or may not ask a follow-up to any of the particular answer that I'm given, and I will share my opinion after I get picks out of both of you. Are you guys down to play this with me?
I'm down.
Ready to roll.
All right. So question number 1, Matt, you can answer first. If looking at the Players' Championship as a whole from top to bottom, do you prefer it over any of the majors? And if so, which ones?
No, but if I had to pick one, it would be the PGA Championship.
That would be the likely one I think most people would pick.
Yeah.
Owen, what about you?
So can you repeat the question?
Yes. So the question is, if looking at the Players' Championship as a whole from top to bottom, do you prefer it over any of the majors? And if so, which ones?
Yeah, I mean, I know, definitely not. I wouldn't even pick it over the PGA. So I think it's in its spot for a reason. And I don't think, I mean, the players love it. So I don't think it's it doesn't hold its own place, but it's just not a major. And that's fine. It can hold its own by it. Like it almost has like its own spot by not being a major. You know what I mean? Like It's the Players' Championship. People love it, but it's not one of the majors. I mean, my boy Ricky Fowler wishes it was, but it's not.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Like, because it's for the players and the players get so behind it, it almost adds a different, unique layer to it. I think if you put it as a major, all of a sudden there wouldn't be so much that goes into it. But for me, no, I think as Matt said, a lot of people would take it over the PGA Championship, but the 2015 PGA Championships, arguably the greatest tournament ever played when Jason Day won it at Whistling Straits. I didn't get quite the same feelings when he won the Players in 2016. So for me, the answer is no on that.
Yeah,
that was waiting for you to work Jason Day.
The only answer possible was, the PGA, but hey, well, good for Jason Day, by the way.
Yeah. Well, you guys shamelessly have already mentioned Abraham Answer on this show, so I had to combat that issue by mentioning Jason Day.
Now we're even.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how long we stay even for. I'm sure even though Day's not in this tournament, I'll find another way to put him in. But question number 2. Owen, you can start us off this time. Favorite sport that isn't golf?
Favorite sport to bet on or favorite sport in general?
I was doing it as favorite sport in general with it. If you want to answer it both ways, feel free to do it.
Okay. I think my favorite sport to watch is the NHL. I love hockey. Grew up loving hockey. Played hockey. Big time New Jersey Devils fan. Been to a bunch of playoff games. I think that the excitement of being at one of those games live is the best. But in terms of betting, I do like betting the NFL, which I know some people don't like, but I have a knack for being pretty good on the NFL. So I like bet on the NFL, but favorite sport to watch is definitely hockey.
Yeah, I just when Vegas got the Golden Knights, that atmosphere that the hockey games get, there's nothing that rivals it.
It's electric.
It's electric. It's quite the experience with it. Matt, what about you?
So I have like a 2-part answer here. I would say basketball. I love NBA and college basketball. Obviously going to UConn, that was awesome to watch the NCAAs. We won a national championship while we were there. It's a great time. But I would also say football for me is probably the easiest, where like you dedicate 3 hours on Sunday to watching 16, now 17 weeks a year. You know everything about your team. You follow throughout the week the injury report or whatever, but it's so much easier to follow than like the NBA. They play 3-4 times a week. It's hard to catch every game, and then you feel like you're kind of missing some things. So I feel like from that perspective, I like the NFL because you could be like an expert on your team, but just dedicating 3 hours a week to it.
RIP Major League Baseball, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to give baseball as an answer either when I give it, but let me ask a couple follow-up questions to that. So when did you guys go to UConn? What year were you guys there where they won?
Kemba Walker, 2011.
Okay.
Yeah. So we were there 2009 to 2013.
Yeah. And then they won it again with Napier.
They won it the year after we left with Napier, which is funny because actually I was in Vegas during the Final Four for a bachelor party. Me and my buddies had them all put big money on UConn money line versus Florida. UConn won, and then I flew back to New York City and was in a UConn bar for the championship game, lost my phone, wallet, everything. So I felt like I was there for 2 championships, even if it was only one. We had plenty of friends that were at UConn for multiple championships. So I will say that was pretty epic experience being a UConn basketball fan in the 2010 to 2015 era.
Yeah, I mean, those were crazy runs that they went on out of nowhere. Mostly, I mean, that Kemba year, he just caught absolute fire to lead them to the championship. But unfortunately, UNLV does not have any success. They had success kind of right when I was born, so I didn't get to witness it firsthand with it. The other question I would ask you guys to what you said originally, favorite NFL team?
You want to go on or?
Yes. Well, I'm a Packers fan, which is random as hell because I'm from New Jersey, but my dad is a Packers fan, grew up a Packers fan. Our family is Giants fans. He's the youngest of 4 brothers. And when he was 5 years old, Packers won a Super Bowl and he decided to tell his brothers to screw off. He was going to be a Packers fan and he never turned back. So when I was born, it was an easy decision. Unlucky for me, the Giants have beaten the Packers on the way to multiple Super Bowls, but I can't really complain being a Packers fan. So, and me and Matt haven't had too many run-ins in the NFL lucky for him. So
Yeah, I think I know what the answer is for Matt. I will let him answer it though.
Yeah, Philadelphia Eagles are my team. Being a Philly guy, just clinched our playoff spot on Sunday, so got to thank the Packers for that. They beat the Vikings. We're officially in.
you're welcome.
But yeah, I mean, they're certainly an interesting team to root for. We won a Super Bowl when I thought we were toast when Nick Foles came in as quarterback, and there's plenty of years I thought that we could win and came up short. So that's kind of life as a Philly fan. But I wouldn't have it any other way.
I'll keep it very short because I don't want to like have this whole show be a bunch of questions with this. But just give me a simple yes or no answer. Is Jalen Hurts the answer for you guys moving forward?
No.
Wow. Wow. Well,
I would agree with that.
Well, would Carson Wentz be the answer, Matt?
I thought that I think they have a better chance if Carson Wentz is quarterback than Jalen Hurts.
The 2002 draft class for quarterbacks, I mean, is notoriously not good. If I was the Eagles, I would use all the picks. Do not draft a quarterback and reassess this in 2023. The one thing I will say is if you can get a pick that's late enough, there's a kid out of Reno, Carson Strong. Maybe you can go back down that Carson route with it. I like him. I think he might end up being the best quarterback in the draft with that. But last question. Oh, actually, let me answer, I guess, before we move on. For me, it was boxing. Okay. I don't love the politics right now around it. You seem to be left with a sour taste in your mouth after every bout. The sport would go a long way if they would remove the greed and drop one of the sanctioning bodies. And just to show it, I'm actually wearing a boxing shirt right now, which I don't know if that can be seen.
Oh, there it is. Ollie Frazier. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, Ollie and Frazier. I love Joe Frazier. I obviously love half my wardrobe is Muhammad Ali shirts, but Joe Frazier's probably my favorite boxer of all time. Like I love this style. I love the way that he went into fights with it. So
how do you feel about Mike Tyson?
I love Mike Tyson. I think
he's my favorite. Yeah.
I think if Mike Tyson could have just stayed on the straight and narrow, he's the most vicious fighter I've ever seen. I've never seen anybody that can fight the way he does. I mean, he was just next level barbaric.
Yeah.
But skillful. That's the thing. Like tons of skill to like the way that he moved and everything that he did.
Yeah. Skill with ferocious anger.
Exactly.
Right.
So
yeah, he was electric to watch.
Completely. And with that idea of fighting in mind, that brings me to the final question. Kind of simple question, kind of complicated question. Who would win a Royal Rumble type fight if you included all golfers into one massive ring?
Wow. Everyone on the PGA Tour.
Every single, let's say every like current player on the PGA Tour, not historically. Anybody that at this moment in their life right now.
I mean, I have a very wild card answer, but I'll let Matt answer first.
I mean, I feel like the immediate, like, obvious answer would be Bryson. I don't want to go that route. So I'm trying to think outside the box here.
Bryson be getting his ass kicked all over the ring.
All right, let me think. Give your answer. I'm going to think a little bit longer.
All right. I mean, I'm just thinking of a little bit of a gangster on the golf course. I'm going with Rory Sabatini.
Wow, that's much more of a wild card answer. I like that. Sabatini doesn't take any crap from anybody.
No one is fighting Rory Sabatini.
No, that's a good answer.
I don't even know what his height and weight are, but I just feel like no one's messing with Rory Sabatini.
I'll give my answer unless you have one right now, Matt.
Another guy I was thinking of that I wouldn't want to mess with. He might be a little old now, but I think Henrik Stenson would put up a pretty good fight for himself. I would not want to mess with Henrik Stenson.
All right.
Yeah, like for me, if we're talking about a one-on-one fight, which is not what we're talking about here, I think Dustin Johnson would be tough to beat. I think he kind of has something behind him to where if you messed with him, you would kind of find out very quickly not to mess with him. I tend to think Brooks is a lot of talk, but the Royal Rumble is a hard question since we're throwing everybody in there. Bryson has a lot of mass, but the problem that comes down with him, I think eventually he tries to figure out how to calculate how to throw a punch, and he probably gets knocked out of the ring, a low blow from Patrick Reed, something like that with somebody who comes in illegally. Dustin Johnson will 100% lose interest. Mickelson's too old at this point, but his bribes would only work for so long. The negatives go on and on for certain players. I feel like the wild card answer here might be John Rahm. And the reason why I say that he's built well for a fight like that. He is bottom heavy with it. So I don't think he's going to be easy to throw over the ring. His anger will likely be a positive. And I also don't think a ton of people would go for him early in a contest. I think that's one of the key points that plays a factor. As I said, somebody like Reed, the second he low blows Bryson DeChambeau, he's going to get choke slammed over the top rope by half the tour at once.
Right. Yeah. I have another wild card. Just after a quick Google search, Sepp Straka is 6'3", 240 apparently.
Wow.
So, I mean, I don't think people are going to be going after Sepp early often either. So he might be in the ring later on with John Rahm and see what he can do.
That explains why my model likes Sepp Straka every single week. I think he's built like a behemoth, and for whatever reason, it doesn't work all the time.
No, he's a monster.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't realize he was so big.
6'3", 240, Austrian. He's mean.
Yeah, it would probably likely be a person like that nobody's going to think of that ends up winning it. It's like the common answers of like a Rahm or somebody who comes to mind is not going to probably be the person that ends up winning it. It's going to be the Sabatini that anger throws everybody out of it, or the Straka who just manhandles everybody.
Yeah, now all we need to do is convince the PGA Tour to sanction this.
Well, that is something that I will try to do on this show, but I guess that will do it for the question game. I will have to work out a name for it, the segment. If anyone wants to sponsor this part of the show, I'm all for incorporating it into the name. But let's move on to the real meat and potatoes, what everyone came here for. 2022 Sentry Tournament of Champions, Kapalua Plantation Course, 7,596 yards, par 73, Bermuda greens. The property was designed in 1991 by Ben Crenshaw and Bill Corr, but did undergo a minor restoration a few years back that was meant to enhance the difficulty. I wouldn't put too much stock into that. Yes, we did get easier scores in 2020, but that should be viewed more because of the extreme winds that hit the property. Last year was back to normal with 34 of the 42 players finishing 11 under par or better, and everyone in the top 10 shot between 19 under to 25 under. I will run down some of what I noticed from a statistical perspective in a second, but I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on the venue first. Did you see anything that stuck out to you? Stats you were using this week? Matt, how about you start us off?
Yeah, I mean, I think first thing that sticks out, obviously, is par 73. You don't see that on the PGA Tour. There's only 3 par 3s, 11 par 4s, 4 par 5s. Immediately right there, that leads me to look at par 5 scoring a little bit more. The length of the course is really long, 7,596 yards, as you mentioned. There is a lot of elevation changes, which kind of leads to some of the tee shots running out, and it could kind of play a little bit shorter than that indicates, and you're also losing one of the par 3s. But overall, I think length is definitely going to be key this week, or at least an advantage. There's wide fairways, easy to hit fairways, easy to hit greens. So I think this week, when you're looking at off the tee, distance over accuracy for sure. It's not really going to matter if you have a guy that's accurate off the tee, because pretty much everyone's going to be finding the fairway. So I think guys that are going to be hitting it long are going to be at an advantage. They're going to be able to get at all these par 5s and 2. I'm looking at par 5 scoring, like I said, distance, approach, and then putting on Bermuda greens. I mean, obviously each week putting matters, but in an event like this, last year Harris English leaned on his putter when he won. And there's obviously different ways to win this event, but that's certainly one of them. So on a birdie fest where 5 of the last 6 winners have come at minus 21 or better, you're going to need to make some putts, and it could very well come down to, who's hottest with the putter.
Yeah, that's a very similar answer. I'll try to shorten it a little bit on my end with it. But Owen, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this week is pretty simplified. You're basically going to need guys who are playing well on approach and are able to get hot with the putter. So if you look at the past winners, they've gained more strokes on approach and more strokes putting than off the tee or around the green. But it is interesting because, like Matt said, it seems like it's long, but because there's one less par 3, there are not drivable, but there are easier drives than normal. And also then you're going to need to be getting up and down for birdie on some holes. So I don't know. I think that your strokes gain approach and making putts are going to be clutch this week, which in a field of 40 players where you have a lot of the best iron players in the world, it's easy to pick a ton of guys. But at the end of the day, that's what's going to be, most important this week: proximity to the hole and then draining putts. So if you can pick those guys out, you're going to be making money this week. And I think there are some options as far down the board as it goes where you can take a risk on a guy who has played well recently with his irons and notably could make putts, and you'll find yourself making money. But yeah, I don't think it's super difficult to look at this course because it is a birdie fest. So end of the day, you're going to need a little bit of luck. You need guys to get hot. And that's really, if it's 20 under or above, that anyone could really pull it off. But we'll see if there's guys that are way down at the bottom if they have a chance. But
yeah, kind of to touch on that, anytime you get a birdie fest, it does open it up for more players to find success. I guess the only counter argument I would have to that is you do have all the best players in the world here. So while I do think it negates some of their strengths, I still think the winner of this tournament is going, I think there's only a certain number that you can actually go to on the odds board or even on DraftKings to actually find the winner. And we can talk about that in a little bit, but to me, it's a pretty straightforward course to start the year. This is meant to be a birdie fest to reward last year's accomplishments. We see that with fairways that average over 50 yards wide on average, equating to driving accuracy being 12% higher than your average tour stop. It is worth noting that Kapalua is the only par 73 on the PGA Tour, as both of them mentioned. That, along with elevation, quiets the nearly 7,600 yard total. That might appear jarring at first glance. Players are going to need to be able, or are going to be able to do pretty much anything they want off the tee. I do think distance is certainly weighable, but the fact that the top 6 participants last year finished 25th, 17th, 7th, 31st, 12th, and 32nd in distance during the event tells me that placing it into a model likely does more harm than good. I think that's something I would rather just look at as an outside factor and not put it into the weight. That would be a tiebreaker for me if it came down to that. Instead, I'd rather look at more course-specific stats since we get a unique layout. There are 11 par 4s, as Matt said, where 8 of them are under 425 yards. The additional 3 play at least 520 yards. So nothing stretches in between that 526 to, 519 yard range. Very weird yardage total there. The 4 par 5s are the easiest holes. 3 of them yield a 48.7% birdie or better rate. The 5th hole is the most gettable at 63.2%. Like most weeks, iron play is going to be extremely important. I decided to focus on only 2 of the ranges specifically. That might be too aggressive since only 45.1% of the approach shots come in those 2 spots. I usually don't recommend leaving 50% of any quantifiable stat on the table, but I'll get into why I did that into a second when I get over the exact breakdown. The last thing I want to point out is that these greens are huge. It's one of the reasons we see an increase of nearly 0.22 putts per round over a typical week. That might not seem like a lot on the surface, but 0.77 is a substantial amount for a venue where putting between 5 to 10 feet is easier than average. The grainy Bermuda really slows things down and can provide some tricky lag putts, with proximity being about 7 feet higher here on approach shots than players might expect. But to get into the breakdown of what I used, I did a 70-30 split between stats and course history. I would vote against any recent form numbers because of the hiatus we've had on tour. I think that that's going down the wrong route with it. When it comes to stats, I started with 17.5% on both par 5 birdie or better and overall birdie or better. I realize 35% on scoring is a ton, but it goes back to what pretty much all of us have been saying. 34 of the 42 players last year were 11 under par or better. You're going to have to reach 25 under or better to win this thing if winds don't alter the event, which it doesn't seem like they will. In my opinion, we can't afford to underweight either category when small margins are going to come into play to decide the winner. I did 15% on proximities that were more prevalent here than tour average. That gets into the 45.1% of approach shots I was discussing, but the ranges from 0 to 100 and 200 plus were the only 2 distances that graded above shot distribution expectation. I found that to be vital because it starts to hone in on the most pertinent scoring opportunities of where they're going to come. Sure, I do miss out on some random chances that might come between a yardage like 100 to 125 yards, but proximity totals tend to be a faulty statistic when you aren't building out to completely mimic a course. A golfer that can hit an iron from 99 yards doesn't all of a sudden lose it when the distance gets to 101. I did 10% on putting from 5 to 10 feet. I prefer this route over 3-putt percentage for 2 core reasons. And by the way, I think you can use 3-putt instead and be just fine. But one, it separates my thought process marginally when the majority of users are going to have 3-putt into their weight. And more importantly, these greens are wildly different than most stops when 3-putting becomes an issue. A lot of the times problems come from speed issues where the ball rolls quickly past the hole, which then creates the break in speed being tough to correctly figure out. You're still going to have golfers, or they're still going to incorrectly judge speed here. But I believe the putts from 5 to 10 feet are going to be straightforward for good putters. DeChambeau, Spieth, Cantlay, and Sungjae are prime examples of players that run into 3-putting problems, but have found success here. I'll quickly run through these last couple here. 15% on course-specific par 4 category. That's going to incorporate the ranges I talked about. Some notables there: Reed, Xander, Leishman, Spieth, Rahm, Thomas. That's every winner in the field since 2014 besides Harris English. 12.5% when it comes to strokes gained total on slow to average Bermuda greens. Secondary way to get putting into the mix. And then I wrapped it up with 12.5% on easy to hit fairways at longer or average to longer courses. That model yielded a top 5 of Spieth, Thomas, Xander, Rahm, and DeChambeau. When running it for upside, it featured all the same names, but snuck in Cameron Smith to the mix. And I know that was a ton to take in there. My course breakdown sometimes could probably be a show of their own, but getting the data and information right is the most important part to finding success. Without it, you have no real game plan or just shooting from the hip. I always want to make sure that all the cards have been laid on the table for everyone listening to pick and choose between. Based off of all that information, is there anything either of you two would like to add before we move into pricing this week?
I would say, I mean, I know that it's tough definitely to gauge current form, obviously because of the hiatus. But I did pick up a fact from Reed Fowler on Twitter. 12 of the last 13 Tournament of Champion winners have played during the month of December in the previous year, whether that's a Hero World Challenge, a QBE Shootout, or Australia, prior to COVID. So I think that maybe not current form, so to speak, because it's tough to gauge a 3-week break, what guys are actually doing, how much they're prepping for this tournament, how much they're practicing, how long ago they went out and started going to the course, etc. But it is notable to say that, 12 of the 13 guys at least have been engaged in playing some sort of tournament in the last month or so. And maybe that is something that maybe there's some correlation to that. I mean, you'd think 12 of the last 13, that means something, but I mean, Kokorak and Jason Na won the QBE. I don't know if that means anything, but Victor Hovland did win the Hero World Challenge. I obviously remember that because of Sam Burns' 5 chipping from off the 14th green. But yeah, I think what you said is beautiful. That their statistics are definitely worthwhile. So there's a lot to get through in there.
Yeah, and I mean, I try to simplify it as much as possible. Like, obviously, that rundown of it wasn't quite the easiest breakdown. Like, I kind of didn't talk about some other things that I wanted to discuss with it. And you can always tune into the Better Golf Pod or the Live Win Daily show I do with Cian Najad, Joel Schreck. I can get more into depth with that a little bit with it. But I think it's interesting any single time you do have trends where, as you said, 12 of 13. And if I was going to look at current form, as you said, I guess it wouldn't necessarily be form. It would just be playing.
Right.
Maybe that's something that you could look at into it. But yeah, I'm not going to look at it and be like, oh, Xander, enters this week with form that doesn't equate to being worth taking, or, whoever the player ends up being. So I wouldn't look at that. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, I think everything was pretty much covered. I think it was an interesting point that you brought up, the putting from 5 to 10 feet, because I did look a little bit into 3-putt avoidance. But there was a good point that you brought up that I hadn't really considered when you were talking about those stats. But I think pretty much everything else that I had gone over was covered. I don't think there was too much to add. I don't know where I stand on the recent form. I can kind of see both perspectives. I don't think any form is recent, but I do think it helps for guys to know they've at least played and, been out there competitively recently. Certainly doesn't hurt.
Right. Like, who knows what Harry Higgs has been doing, but
yeah,
he's not here this week because he doesn't win, but
here's the problem with that stat a little bit, I guess. Like, what do you do with somebody like Bryson DeChambeau who plays in the gimmicky event with Brooks Koepka, but hasn't been playing a ton of golf before that?
Yeah, I think it's so hard. This tournament, while, we kind of say it's straightforward about what you're looking for, it's a birdie fest. I think we should also mention that it's so challenging because this is the only time this year that we're going to go into an event where we have no knowledge of really what anyone's done over the past month. We have no idea how hard they've been working. It's all kind of guesswork. So it's hard to gauge, oh, this guy's going to come and be more prepared than this guy, or, oh, he's definitely been practicing hard. You don't really know what anyone's been up to.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to it. But let's talk about these players then and try to at least provide some sort of an insight into it. So we have 5 players priced above $10,000 this week. After having a few that featured 7 or higher during the offseason, Jon Rahm leads the way at $11,000 and is followed by Collin Morikawa at $10,800, Justin Thomas $10,600, Bryson DeChambeau $10,200, and Viktor Hovland $10,000. When you see this board, what stuck out to you guys? I guess Owen, start us off here.
Yeah, so I mean, for me as a guy who doesn't play DFS particularly, that in depth, I would say that Justin Thomas to me seems like the most value. I love Collin Morikawa, so I would lean towards them two in particular. But with JT, with the course history, him kind of finding some form recently and playing better, I think obviously he's been great here, and there's something to be said about that, especially with this is typically a stop where there is a hiatus and he's played well. So I think if you're looking just at that strictly, he's a guy I would look at right off the bat. And then I don't know if Hovland's overpriced. I don't love him being in the same grouping. And for me, it would be Thomas or Morikawa for sure.
Yeah, if there's one person, and I'll get into it in a second, but if there's one person I'm fading from this group, it would be Viktor Hovland. Matt, what about you?
Yeah, I hate to repeat Owen's answer, but I would lean Justin Thomas there as well. Of course, history, kind of says it all here. He's pretty much tremendous here every year. He's coming in, like Owen mentioned, on a break every year. It doesn't seem to affect him too much. And I think he's got, a little bit of redemption coming for him this year after the incident here last year where, the Greenside Mike picked him up and it kind of left a sour taste in his mouth. I think he's going to kind of come in with a clear head this year and try to, turn it around a little bit. So I also think it sounds weird to say because he was like player champion last year, but I feel like he kind of had a disappointing year by his standards. So I feel like he is kind of one of the guys that's more motivated to start off this year, on a right note. So I would expect him to play really well this week.
Yeah, I there's sites out there that are doing best ball for fantasy golf and, different things with one and done contests that go with that. And I'm kind of a believer that Justin Thomas is going to earn the most money on tour this year. So I agree with your guys' thought process on that. I think he's going to get off to a hot start. The problem that goes in with him is the ownership is wild right now. We're looking at 40+%, and those numbers are going to drop. That would be my concern. I guess, just to touch on all these players a little bit from my perspective, we only have 39 players teeing it up this week. In my opinion, you're going to have to think very outside of the box if you want to find an opportunity for real success. There's just too many lineups that are going to be duped otherwise with it. That doesn't mean to only play the low-owned players. I still think you need to stick out with who's modeling well for you, but there's always ways to diversify a build while still playing the golfers you want. For me, that means potentially leaving more money on the table than you are used to doing. And that technically should allow all options to be in play if you go into it with that mindset. Rahm's early ownership looks somewhat sedated. The price tag of $11,000 isn't outrageous when you compare it to where it was a few months ago at his peak. He was in 11,005 plus range almost every single time. While he's never won the tournament here, he's also never finished worse than 10th place. It's hard to run a model that Rahm doesn't grade well. Now, the one thing I will say that I don't love about him is these birdie fests aren't necessarily the tournaments that are best suited for him. I'd prefer him at a Memorial. I'd prefer him at a US Open. I'd prefer him on one of these courses where that his skill set is going to shine through. I think he's in play for a top 10. I don't think he's going to do worse than that, but that would be my only concern. I'm curious to see where the ownership goes with him.
Where is he projected at right now?
Right now, he is projected at 21.9%, which puts him as the 11th highest owned player on the board.
Yeah, so in that scenario, I feel like he definitely holds value then over potentially Morikawa and JT. But because I can't imagine him finishing outside the top 10. You know what I mean?
Yes, and there's
And
not
that's
really
the same thing with betting on him and playing him in DFS. Like you have to bite the bullet, kind of, where he's the top price guy. Although I guess JT now is kind of moved into that same spot in the betting market, but Rahm doesn't put up many duds. So
no, he doesn't, and that's kind of to the point of what you're saying with it too. Like when you look at it, they're the same exact price right now, and I think the price is, I mean, at the top of the board, you're always going to be probably a little bit off of what they should be, but let's just say for the sake of this argument here that the ownerships are correct. I mean, 43% for Thomas, 22% for Rahm. Vegas is saying that they have the same likelihood of winning this tournament. I do think it's pretty similar at the end of the day. 40 something percent is difficult to kind of stomach. And I really like Thomas. The course history is very tough to ignore, but he's more likely to throw in a dud if he's going to. And it doesn't mean you can't play Thomas, but you're just going to have to find a unique way to do it if you're going to go down that route. As far as Morikawa goes, I'm always lower on him, it seems like, than the consensus. It kind of goes to what we were talking about earlier, where I would just prefer him if this was a course where fairways were more narrow. He could then use his skill set there. Now, his irons are incredible, and that's something that at least always will keep him into it. But the recent form over his past 24 rounds from 0 to 100 yards and 200 plus places him outside the top 25 in this field. The data is way too limited to derive anything real from that. But as I said, I just prefer him in these other scenarios, mostly if you're looking for winner's circle type potential with it.
Right.
I think he'll be
especially at the price that he's at.
Exactly. I think he's going to be fine. Like, I'm not trying to come on here and be like, oh, Colin Morikawa is going to blow up a lineup. Like, sure, it's possible that he might do it. But if we're looking at guys that are a little bit more likely to not win the tournament and maybe have a little bit more volatility, I think he's in that range of being as volatile of anybody here. Thomas is, as I've mentioned, his early ownership numbers have gone nuclear. He is number one in my model when looking at just a statistical perspective. If you do start with him, 7,880 per spot. Pricing is soft enough to figure it out still, but I don't love a complete stars and scrubs type build for some of the reasons that we've mentioned already. I still believe some semblance of being balanced will play better. I kind of really like Bryson DeChambeau as the wild card of this group. I wouldn't put it past him bludgeoning the course. I also wouldn't put it past him imploding in a different way. You know, he ranks dead last in this field from 0 to 100 yards on those proximity numbers. He's going to be faced with that distance a lot. So if he struggles with that, anything's possible. But I think the pricing seems fair at 10,200. I have no issues if the ownership hovers around where it is right now. And the potential of him running away with the tournament likely seems to be as high for him as it would be anybody. I'm not going to get into a ton of thought with Hovland with it. I just don't know if this is the best course for him because of how big the greens are. I think the around the green game for him could struggle. But with all that being said, I don't believe it's a necessity that you must start up here. Rahm, Thomas, and DeChambeau would be my three preferred routes in some capacity if I did. I think they're all relatively safe for a top 10. Their win equities are going to be as high as anyone in this field. But in the same breath, you do start creating some roster deficiencies because of ownership or general construction. You don't have to look any further than outright numbers to see that second part. Once we drop past Leishman at 7,500, only two golfers better than 65 to 1 come from that range below 7,500. So pretty much all your win equity is coming from the $7,500 to golfers and above. I don't want to be rounding off lineups with stone minimum price tags of 6,000, but Rahm and DeChambeau are creating the best leverage of the group right now. As I said, Thomas has the best statistical upside, but 40% is just going to be hard for me to stomach if it stays there. I don't think he's necessarily more likely to win than Rahm or DeChambeau on the surface. And as I said, 2 times the popularity isn't exactly where I want to be, but that will take us into the 9,000s where we only have 3 players to discuss. How do you see this range, and what do you guys, or I guess, do you have anything else to add to that first section also? Oh, and you can start us off.
No, I mean, I honestly don't have much to add to that. JT being a 40% ownership, I think would be scary in a DFS perspective, but I think this course clearly sets up well for him where his misses off the tee are less of a big deal. And then if he gets dialed on with the irons, and I don't know, JT is so hit or miss with the putter. It's like, you never really know when he's going to get hot, but it seems like this is the type of birdie fest that he likes for whatever reason. He also loves the no cut type events where he can put up a -2 while the guy, the leader's at -8, and then the next day he shoots 8 under and he's right back in it. So I would still lean JT there, but the Rahm perspective with him being lower owned, I think is a pretty good angle. And then in the $9,000 range, I mean, my favorite play of the week from I guess this is even in the $9,000 range. Would be Jordan Spieth, but who are we working with in the $9,000 range?
In the $9,000 range, we're working with Patrick Cantlay at 9,700, Xander Schauffele at 9,500, and Sam Burns at 9,100. Jordan Spieth is going to come in right behind that. We can talk about him in a second at 8,900 right, because I am in agreement with you on that, and we'll discuss that. But yeah, those three in the 9,000s.
All right. Well, if we're talking 9,000s, then I'm going with my boy Sam Burns. I think I'm just going to keep hammering this drum because I get the fact that he's now higher priced. His value on the odds market for outright betting is lower. It's harder to bite the bullet with Sam Burns, but I think he's got pretty much an elite skill set. He does everything very well, putts well in Bermuda. He can get locked in with his irons, and I don't know. There's something about Sam Burns this year. I feel like he's just continued to play well, and I feel like his motivation factor is high. I know a lot of these guys are formidable winners, and I think he's continuing trying to make a name for himself. What's his ownership look like? Because I think in terms of the 9,000 range, I like Sam Burns. I feel like Xander and Cantlay would probably be more popular.
See, here's where it gets a little tricky, and this is what I found to be surprising. And these are early numbers. These will probably change. I kind of would be shocked if Xander doesn't end up being the most popular player in this range when all is said and done. But as of right now, Cantlay 19.8%, Xander 29.7%, Sam Burns 31.3%.
Wow, the Burns train is real.
It's real for sure.
In that scenario, I mean, I don't think a pivot to Cantlay is crazy. I think him and Xander's game is so similar. They're both so well-rounded that they can both get hot for a birdie fest. Xander, obviously, course history-wise, you would love to back him. But I thought I would be an outlier with the Burns play, but I guess not.
Yeah, the Burns movement is, and like when we look at it, Burns, and these are players that are elite talents in the world. I'm not naming people that are like not top 10, 20 players, but Burns, Cameron Smith, those two guys in particular, if you were to tell me that one of those two guys ended up becoming a top 2, top 3 player in the world, I think those are the two most likely players that are in that range right now. Maybe you guys could think of somebody else that would enter the mix, but I think those guys are still young enough. Well, I don't want to hear Abraham.
You're trying to answer.
We're not even to answer yet on the price board on this. I know he should be like a $10,000 or $12,000 golfer in your guys' mind with it, but
you teased us with that. I mean,
I realized once I did it, I saw your guys' face light up, and I was like, "Oh no, I've set you guys up for this."
Well, yeah. I mean, we'll get into the $8,000 range, but I think there's certainly value in the $8,000 range for sure.
Well, what about you, Matt, in this range?
Yeah, I'm very high on Xander this week. I think he's going to play extremely well. I'm sure we'll get more into that in a little bit, but he would be my pick in the $9,000 range. I'm expecting a huge week for him. Kind of as Owen mentioned, phenomenal course history. He's another guy who I think the narrative might be kind of a little bit overplayed at this point, but him in the smaller field no-cut events, his results do talk for him. That's 3 of his 4 PGA Tour wins, 4 or 5 if you include the Olympics. So he seems to kind of thrive in these events. So I would lean him in this range.
It's overplayed, but it's also real for him and Thomas. Like we can keep saying like, oh, it's a no-cut tournament, but for the reason that Owen mentioned is why it makes sense. These guys are so explosive that they shoot an even par, and maybe they shoot 2 rounds of even par, and like they wouldn't have made the cut in a normal situation. And then they go 10 under, and they put up the 2 rounds of the day to make up for everything, and they make more birdies than anybody's made. And on DraftKings, we're looking for birdie makers, and in a no-cut tournament, the ability for those 2 guys to score, that's what makes Xander and even Thomas, I guess we have to look at the ownership percentage, but that's what makes them formidable no matter what it is, because they're going to score. These guys are going to score on par 5s. They're going to find opportunities. They're going to probably exceed whatever their finishing position is, even if they do struggle with it. Now, when we talk about 40% ownership, that's a different game than talking about like 15% ownership with it. But for me, we aren't used to having only 3 golfers in a tier. I think it creates an interesting game theory situation for mass field contests. One of the possibilities I will talk about when we get into the 8,000s, because as Owen said, I also love that range. But for as great as I think Sam Burns is as a golfer, and for as much as I think he's going to accomplish this year, I can't understand how he's projected to be higher owned than Cantlay or Xander. I know Burns tore up the offseason, but momentum has cooled off for all golfers, like we've talked about. I do think playing this course in the past is a benefit. And the fact that Burns doesn't have that is enough for me to take my chances fading him if he's going to be a top 5 owned player on the board. I think there's other weeks to play him. I think they're going to be very shortly. We'll find it. And I think Burns is going to have a big year. But I would temper expectations here, I guess would be the best way to put it. Cantlay's ownership at under 20% would be a gift. I've seen it shifting between 18 to 28%. That is where stacking the top of the card with a more boomer bust approach becomes interesting to me. Him and Rahm would create extreme firepower at very encouraging percentages. My model loves Xander. He hasn't finished outside of 5th here in the last 3 years. I do think the price tag will create an ownership frenzy around him. And as I said, I do think he will end up being the most popular player, potentially other than Thomas on this board. And who knows where ownership goes. If enough people tout him, I mean, there is a real possibility that guys might want to go to him. The form hasn't been as good coming in. That's why I still think Thomas will end up being the most popular. Xander might likely end up being the second most popular, but I think you're getting a discount in price when it comes to Xander and Cantlay. So for me personally, I'm going to have 0 Sam Burns unless we get a massive correction in ownership. If that happens, I will relook at these numbers. And my favorite play, I guess, from a leverage game theory standpoint would be Patrick Cantlay. I just think he creates the best opportunity of win upside and where he's at with it. So that's where I'm at there. I will start us off in the 8,000s because it ties into the second part of what I was discussing a second ago. Since we only have 3 players in the 9,000s, and by the way, most people aren't going to do what I'm about to say. There's a real possibility in mass field contests to begin lineups in the 8,000s and have top to bottom win equity on all 6 players. Ownership completely goes out the window because you are not only diversifying your start points, but also will likely be leaving some extra funds on the table. You could do a lineup, and this is just a random example. Spieth, Cameron Smith, Sungjae Im, Tony Finau, Patrick Reed, and Brooks Koepka, and still have $200 left over. Throw Leishman in there over someone, and you open up even more money in the 7,000s there. You would need one of those names to win the event. But it does open up a different path on some of the more chalky selections. So just to run through these guys with quick thoughts on it, Spieth is probably my favorite play on the entire board. He ranks first in this field when it comes to par 4 average, easy to hit fairways and strokes gained total on Bermuda. Koepka would be the shot in the dark play. But would it really shock anyone if he won this event at 5 to 10% ownership? He's currently the lowest owned guy, above 7,500. I believe even a little bit lower than that. I will double check on those numbers and post it. He would be GPP only, but the poor perception around non-majors does create a window of potential. If you are looking to throw I don't want to call it a shot in the dark, but somebody that's going to come in under the radar. Berger's adequately priced at 8,400. I tend to think he's better utilized in cash in a tournament. Cameron Smith would be the opposite of that at 8,300, even if his ownership is currently over 25%. He's never finished inside the top 15 in 2 prior attempts here, which would concern me if trying to use him for safety. But in the right build, he's in play for GPPs. I think it's an ideal setup for Sungjae at 8,200s. He's in this inside the top 10 of my model on slow Bermuda, as well as strokes gained total over his past 24 rounds, putting from 5 to 10 feet, sand safe percentage, which does have some connection to Kapalua, and scrambling. I will let you two talk about your boy Abraham Answer. I have a feeling I'm creating a Royal Rumble of sorts on this podcast as it is with all the trashing I've been doing of him. So I will let you guys talk about him. I don't think he's going to nosedive lineups. I want to throw that out there. Like, I think he's safe for a top 20. I'm just looking for a little bit more upside. I think there are better spots to play him. Matt and Owen are more of the answer whisperers with it. So I would take their opinion above what I'm going to say with that. And then Finau is a potentially fun GPP play, especially if you want to get away from Brooks and onto someone with a higher floor. Finau tends to play safer golf on slow greens than he does on a fast surface. He surprisingly has struggled some lately on par 5s, but the fact that the fairways are wide open should allow him to use his distance and not worry about some of the misses that have troubled him over the past few months. That does it for me, though, in the 8,000s. Anything that I missed that you two like? Anyone you're higher on than I am in general? Reasons why Answer's going to win the tournament? I'm ready for all of it. Owen, talk to me.
All right. Well, I'll start with Spieth because I'm all aboard with Jordan Spieth this week. I think this is a perfect mix of him kind of getting his game back together, coming back to a course where he's had success. the putter is going to be huge this week. I think if, like you said, like the slower greens, him having familiarity here, I think he's going to be draining some long putts in Jordan Spieth-esque fashion, and that's kind of what gets him to win tournaments. And the wide fairways, I think, creates more of an advantage for him. He doesn't have to worry as much about that. Like kind of just like a game theory thought where he's not worried about his off the tee game. And his short game is, as magical as it gets. So I think where if he has short approach shots, I think he'll be as creative as you need to be. And it all comes down to making putts for him. And I think he's going to make a bunch of them this week. With that being said, with Abe Ancer, I'm having a tough time with Abe this week because I love the guy to death. And I think from a DFS perspective, it's tough because you're really going to rely, I think, on his putter because he's not going to be as elite with the irons as some of the other guys here. But that being said, I mean, he's fifth in his field in his last 24 rounds on Bermuda. I think he can definitely get hot. And I think motivation-wise, similar to Burns, I think he's kind of this up-and-coming character that wants to prove himself every time he's out there. He won a WGC. I think he likes maybe this smaller field type event. We'll see if that narrative comes to fruition as his career moves on. But Abe is always going to be a force to be reckoned with, in my opinion. We'll see how this year plays out for him. I think me and Matt are in unison on this. We're a little bit upset that the value on Abe has kind of disappeared because he won, and now we have to bite the bullet on these lower numbers. But yeah, I wouldn't be super high on Abe this week. Coming from an Abe whisperer, I wouldn't be super high. I think this course doesn't really suit his strengths per se. And like you said, I think there is some sort of the course history narrative where the guys who have been here, done that, have played this tournament before will have an advantage. And yeah, I mean, this is the first event of the new year. And, like JT and Xander, even Patrick Reed, Cantlay, these guys have been here, won tournaments, and gotten to play this event before. Ancer has not. So that would be the only negative for me on him. And, the wide fairways, I think, similar to Morikawa, kind of take away from his potential strengths. So, Matt, do you have any Abe whispering thoughts?
I would love to come on here and say I think Abe's going to win this week. I would have to agree. I don't really think this is his course. I would prefer him on kind of a tighter course where he could use his accuracy off the tee.
Harbor Town. It's like those types of courses.
Yeah, over the field. This is not really. Once I hear wide fairways, it's not really doing him any favors. So I don't really think it's an Abe week. I'm not going to say anything negative about him. I certainly think he'll play fine, but this isn't a week where I'm going too high on him, which sucks because we haven't had a chance to take him in, a good month and a half now, whatever it's been. So I'm dying to do it, but this isn't a week. I got to contain myself. New Year's resolution, holding strong. But I would say in this range, the 8,000 range, you brought up a pretty good point with Koepka because you mentioned the low ownership, and I think that he's an absolute wild card. And as much as people are just going to jump to the conclusion that, we're in Hawaii, Brooks is here for a vacation, he doesn't care about this event. Like, he's obviously talented enough to go out and win it. And when he's on, he's as good as anyone on the field. So I think you're getting value if he shows up and plays as well as he can. And I think kind of like we talked about in the beginning, it's hard to really gauge it's hard to gauge a player's psyche. So I think if you take the chance with Brooks, it could pay off big time this week.
Yeah, I love the wild card Brooks play, to be honest. And also, I kind of like Finau too. I think he has a relatively similar game to Xander in consistency type of manner. And me and Matt have taken our shots at Tony Finau, no doubt. So sorry about that, Tony. But he's got the monkey off his back. He's got the win under his belt. Now he's at this tournament. I think his confidence is going to rise this year, which I think it should. I mean, it is something to be said to win a tournament other than the Puerto Rico Open. So I think he'll have some confidence coming into this, and this is going to be a course that should fit his game well. And I think, did he get an exemption last year potentially? Did he play here last year?
And to add to that too, I believe Abraham Ancer got an exemption into it too.
Yeah, they both got an exemption.
And Harris English did too, and he won.
Well, but
Exactly. Yeah. So last year, Answer finished 17th. Finau finished 31st, which is not good, but like I'm willing to throw that out. It's one result.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I feel like people were like
Really
so
bad,
high on Tony and he won, and now I feel like he's almost like kind of people have hopped off. I don't know what. It's kind of hard to understand, but I feel like he's almost getting like underappreciated now.
Well, he's below Answer on the DFS market. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, his odds kind of go all over the place in the market and the perception around him. And the nice thing is you can play multiple guys in this range. Like you can fit a Spieth in a Koepka, and you can fit a Spieth in a Finau in. And I think that it does open up things you can do. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's going to be Spieth is my favorite play. And then the two guys that are a little bit under the radar, Koepka's a lot under the radar, would be Brooks and Tony. I think those are the two guys that I'm not shocked if one of those two guys or both of those two guys end up being in some big winning lineups. I wouldn't be shocked if one of those two guys won the tournament. Like that's kind of the range where we're getting to. Those are the last few names that have a realistic chance to win this tournament. We will drop a little bit lower. There are a couple of those guys in the $7,000 range, but it does narrow up very quickly. But as we do move into the 7,000s, we only have 7 players in general to discuss. But ownership aside, is there anyone that is standing above the rest of the group? Matt, I guess start us off this time.
This is an easy one, Matt. It's a layup for you.
Always a pretty big Patrick Reed guy. I'm not going to divert here. But I think that he has obviously tremendous value this week. He's played well at this course previously, and I think also kind of quietly, well, maybe not so much quietly, but toward the end of last year, he sort of figured it out. And I know we talked about recent form isn't so recent anymore, but he had played so bad for like a 2-month stretch after, his hospitalization. And then he had 2 top 3s in his last 4 starts. After that, to close the year, he had a great chance down there at the Hero World Challenge where he was in it on the back 9. Hovland obviously, had that big eagle and sealed the deal. But I think Reed is kind of starting to find his stride. I think he's a guy that's always kind of grinding. That's his mold. So I don't think he's taking too much time off in the offseason. I think he's pumped to get out there and start playing again. So I think Reed's going to have a good week, and I think it's a good, 7,000 range is pretty good for him.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I mean, I think most people are here for a vacation. I think like people are competitive. We don't know where their games are at. We can call it grinding for Patrick Reed. I don't know exactly what he's doing out there. I mean, sometimes it's beyond grinding. But I also like the Patrick Reed call. I'll get into that into a second. But Owen, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I have to definitely agree with what Matt says. I think he's always undervalued, Patrick Reed, and specifically at a place where he's played well before. I mean, he's got multiple runner-ups and a victory. He's a force to be reckoned with in terms of winning tournaments. So in terms of win equity, I think he's definitely up there. I think my only worry with him is that, he could definitely throw up a dud and play very poorly. But so in that sense, just looking at this range in general, I would maybe go to Jason Kokorak, who I don't know if he'll be super popular or not. I think obviously he came off the win at the QBE with Kevin Na, and he's coming off a very good 2021 season. So I think Jason Kokorak in general is still a guy that people obviously know, but maybe isn't as highly touted as he probably should be. And I think this course will probably set up well for him. If he hits the ball long, he putts well in Bermuda. I think there'll be value with Kokorak in that $7,000 range.
Yeah, to go through some of those ownership projections, and Kevin Na and Billy Horschel are at the bottom of the range. And I mean, unfortunately, they're in the bottom of my model too, so I can't really make much of an argument for them. But if looking at the other 5 guys in ownership, the top one would be Mark Leishman at 25.6%. Taylor Gooch would be second at 24.5%. Reed would be third at 19.8%. Kokorak fourth at 14.6%, and then English would be last at 13.6%. For me, I think that the players of the Reed, the Leishman, Kokorak, English would be my 4 favorites. It's going to be the 4 more expensive ones and the 4 more popular ones, but I think they're all a little bit undervalued and could have easily been put into the $8,000 range, or at least a few spots higher. Kokorak would be GPP only, but he does have the statistical makeup to find success at Kapalua. That didn't come to fruition last year with a 35th, but it's easier to forgive a lot of the same flaws he brings into the week as Hovland because of the price tag at $7,700. Kokorak could easily and very quietly probably post a top 10. Reed is likely GPP only, but I really like his upside that he presents with it. Like, I think when you're looking at a guy who does have win equity and he's only, I mean, I don't want to say only 19%, but in a tournament like this, that's the 13th overall player. I do think that there's leverage you can create from that number still. Leishman has playability across the board, although the ownership is starting to become worrisome. Probably like him more than anyone in this range from a statistical fit, but he also shouldn't be double the ownership of English, which does bring me into why I like him as a play. Last year was marginally aberrational for how the American won the title. I can't remember which one of you mentioned it, but the putter was one of the reasons why he ended up winning it. But second lowest owned golfer when looking at $7,500 or above. I just think that that's worth noting. Like, I think those 4 guys carry your best win equity, and I'm looking for win equity. I can eat some of the chalky plays, and none of them are really that chalky other than Leishman with that. Like, Leishman and Gooch are the only 2 that we're looking at over 20% right now. We'll see where Reed goes with it, but it's those big names that you would expect. Those are the guys that have shown potential to win tournaments of this caliber. I mean, you could throw Horschel into that mix too, but I just don't like Horschel at this course.
I thought you were going to just say you don't like Horschel, which
that's more of a stick picks thing. That's his little shtick on the Better Golf Pod. I don't have anything against him. I hit him at the match play. I kind of like the guy a little bit. I might be the only person in this industry that can kind of stomach him. That was one of the bigger tickets I've hit ever betting golf.
Billy boys.
Yeah.
Like Billy.
Yeah. But he is very unpopular, which
he's an annoying. He's an annoyance. Yeah.
Yeah, he is. But I mean, there's places for people like that. And and you have that with Reed, you have that with DeChambeau, but you either love them or you hate them is I think what it comes down to.
Right. Well, you love him when he's winning you money. That's for sure. So you mentioned him. I feel like if he's going to be low owned, I don't know. I don't hate Billy Ho at a place like this, but I agree with you. I think Leishman probably holds the most upside in that group besides Patrick Reed, obviously. But
I mean, Horschel does have positive leverage in my model. I mean, if you are trying to look at that, like that's something worth noting. Like he's a negative value on the surface, but he has shown he can compete at WGCs. He can win WGCs. Like he is a quality player when he puts it together. I just don't know if this is the best setup for him.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
But as we move into the 6,000s, I'm sure there's going to be a player or two in this group that will crack the top 10. And I'll have you kind of just continue with some thoughts in this range. Anybody you like down here?
So I have a few thoughts. Another guy who has not won many tournaments, who hasn't been involved in this event often, would be Joel Damon for me. I like Joel's game. I think he's got a chance to play well this week. And I don't know what the ownership projections are for him, but he's kind of got that consistent game where he's top 12 in strokes gained approach in his last 24 rounds in this field, top 10 in ball striking. And he's, floating around mid-tier in terms of his putting on Bermuda. But I don't know. I feel like Joel is another one of those guys that's going to come into this event with a little motivation. And if you're looking for, a lower owned guy down towards the bottom, you can kind of plug and play with Joel. I like Joel this week. And a little caveat, I feel like Phil is going to be, I don't know is Phil going to be high played? Because
no, but I like Phil this week.
I do too.
Because it makes no sense, but I kind of like Phil this week. Yeah.
So let me touch on this really quickly when it comes to ownership. So there's 3 players that are projected to be above 10% down in this range as of right now. The highest owned player, Seamus Power, 21.9%. Second would be Joel Dahman at 16.7%. And third would be Max Homa at 13%. I don't see anybody above 8% right now. So it's kind of those 3 guys where a lot of people seem to be going right now. Does that change your thoughts any on Dahman?
I mean, maybe marginally. I think him and Homa are comparable-ish. I would say Homa's upside is probably higher. So if he's going to be lower owned, I maybe would like Homa better. But I don't know. I think Damon's got the good mix of, what's in his bag. I think he could play well this week. Again, he's not a formidable winner, so I wouldn't say that he's someone you should rely on, but I'm going to be looking at him for a top 10 play this week and, for value wise. So I think, he's at plus 400, plus 500, I believe, on a couple of different books. So I think Damon's upside is also pretty high, but I guess if you're looking at the ownership wise, I mean, Phil seems, who knows what the hell Phil's going to do this week. So
yeah, he's 3.7% right now, which is of players on the board. That's 31st out of 39th. Actually, I'm sorry. That is 38th out of 39th.
Wow.
He's
no love for Phil this week. I honestly,
Hey,
I would throw a bone out there and put Phil in your lineup.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably, and I'll get into it in a second with it, but he might be the best play in this section, in my opinion. But Matt, what about you?
I like Max Homa this week. I feel like Homa still doesn't really get any love. Obviously, on social media, people like him, but I mean, in terms of his actual talent, he's now won 3 times in the last 3 years, and 2 of them were like pretty good events.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's still just kind of disrespected on the odds list, and he's all the way down here in the 6,000 range. In DraftKings, I kind of feel like Homa is still just a little bit under the radar, if you could even say that for a 3-time PGA Tour winner. But he's got the distance to play well this week on this course. Obviously, he doesn't, necessarily have great, form here, but I think that he could play well this week. I think that he's got good value down here in this range.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking to throw darts down in this range, I think one of the things you need to be looking for is somebody that can excel in a certain facet of their game. No matter what that ends up being, it needs to be something that's pertinent to the course that's being played. But a guy like Max Homa, he's a great par 5 scorer. Maybe he's able to, play those a little bit better than anticipation with it. And then all of a sudden you get a top 10 finish out of him, or even maybe better with it. Like Homa's another guy that I like. I hit him at the Genesis earlier this year, and I think he's a good player. I think that his skill set does play well against some of the top players in the world. But for me, as I said, I'm kind of looking for elite qualities from players. So that leaves me with players like Cameron Champ at 6,800. He's the second longest player in this field and can score with his long irons. He ranks 30th in my model in par 5 scoring. But what happens if he catches fire on the par 5s because they're wide open off the tee, and it allows him to maximize his distance? It's a similar thought process on Phil Mickelson at 6,500. He's third in this field on slow Bermuda and at longer courses that feature easy to hit fairways. We all know he's an absolute wizard with his short irons. If Mickelson got himself to be a first round leader, I wouldn't be shocked. I don't believe he can maintain it for 4 days, but there is upside for him at a course that isn't that different from a Champions Tour event. And then the other 2 guys that I'm just going to throw out there, maybe Garrick Higo can use his par 5 scoring at 6,400, and then Lucas Herbert at 6,100. I don't have enough data on either of them to feel confident. But as far as Herbert goes, his combination of short iron play and par 5 scoring tie together nicely. His skill set for a random top 10 is higher than most of the players you can find near the bottom. I mean, is there anything we have missed on this entire board that either of you guys want to talk about before we wrap this up?
I mean, I like the Higo thought. I mean, he definitely has the potential to catch fire. I think, depending on his ownership, you say it's pretty low. I think he's got the potential to catch fire. We've seen it. I think, he's winning at the Palmetto in a birdie fest type event. I don't know whether the pressure of being in an elite type field with all these, big name players will get to him or not. And that's kind of the wild card for a lot of young players, knowing how they're going to react to playing in fields like this. But I don't know. Yeah. Phil seems like the right move and a, little contrarian type play in the DFS world, where if he's gonna be low owned, you could easily see Phil knocking down 8 or 9 birdies in a round this week.
Yeah, 9th place finish, 10th place finish, 11th place finish. Give him something like that, and I mean that's really, if he gave you that, I mean you're all of a sudden talking about having a legitimate chance to win what you're in if you put the pieces around him correctly.
Yeah, I think you talked me into a Phil first round later bet this week too.
Yeah, that's a bet that's one of the bets I was going to reveal on my Better Golf pod, which I guess that came out pretty straightforward that's where I'm going to be with it. But I like Phil in this tournament. I do think he has the upside to find a lot of success. But I mean, that will do it for us this week. As always, you can get my final betting card on my podcast, Better Golf. I'm still putting together some of the pieces there as we speak. But I wanted to thank you guys again for joining me on the show. I meant everything I said at the beginning. I have nothing but the utmost respect for each of you. And I know 2022 is going to be a massive year for Draws and Fades. Please let everyone know one more time where they can find each of you, and definitely discuss your podcast again if you would like.
Absolutely. So yeah, you can find me at Owen_Vrabel on Twitter. And you can find our podcast on Apple and Spotify and around the world at Draws and Fades, Draws and Fades. And yeah, I mean, we're excited for this year. Obviously, we're going to get into the little bit of video content this year, try to expand our horizons a little bit. But I mean, we've been riding a hot streak over the past couple of years and looking to continue it. Just happy to be doing it with my brother Matt Miller. And yeah, we're excited.
Yeah, you can find me at MattyMills85 on Twitter. Give us a listen if you haven't. Feel free to interact with us. We love taking new ideas and interacting with any kind of listeners. So if you have any suggestions or any kind of feedback, do not hesitate to give it to us. We're always looking to kind of grow and improve in new ways. And I think we have kind of some new exciting stuff coming this year. So make sure to tune in.
And thank you, Spencer, for having us on. I'm gonna have to post my DFS lineup this week and send it, post it, just lock it in. I feel like it's gonna be a lot of the 8,000 players, and we'll see if that lineup works. I don't know, but Phil Mickelson may be involved, he may not be involved. I'm excited. This is the type of stuff we love, so I appreciate you for having us on again.
Of course, guys, and as I said, Matt and Owen are two of the best guys in this industry. I'm lucky to be able to call both of you my friends. So please be sure to give their podcast a listen every week. Your bankroll will also thank you for doing so. But you can find me on Twitter at Tios Sports. You can find this show at BeTheNumberPod. And as Matt and Owen just said, you can find them together at draws_N_fades. Good luck this week to everyone at the Sentry Tournament of Champions, and I'm pumped to be back for the 2022 season. It should be a profitable and exciting year, and I appreciate all the support that everyone has shown me. I will see you guys back here next week.
Let's go.